The year 1861 found Coldwater Creek, Ohio, nestled deep within a landscape ripe with the burgeoning anxieties of a nation on the precipice of civil war. Yet, in this quiet, agrarian community, a more localized and insidious dread had begun to unfurl, distinct from the distant drums of conflict. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible tremor at first, a faint vibration in the crisp autumn air that most attributed to the whimsical play of wind through skeletal branches. But as days bled into weeks, the tremor solidified, morphing into a palpable unease carried on the frigid breath of late autumn. The whispers, once dismissible, now gained substance, resonating with a chilling clarity that could no longer be ignored by even the most skeptical of minds. The epicenter of this burgeoning disquiet was the Old Mercy Convent, a desolate edifice of weathered stone that stood sentinel on a lonely hill, casting a long, somber shadow over the meandering creek below. For 2 decades, its windows had remained like vacant eyes, staring blankly across the fields, its once hallowed halls long since surrendered to the relentless march of decay. The very air around it seemed to hum with an unsettling silence, broken only by the scurrying of unseen creatures and the mournful sigh of decaying timber. The Sisters of the Order of St. Agnes, who had once inhabited its solemn chambers, had vanished without a trace in the unforgiving winter of 1841, leaving behind a void filled only with speculation and the persistent, bone-deep chill of forgotten sorrow. No official records, no hurried missives, no definitive proclamations ever explained their abrupt and total disappearance. The absence was absolute, leaving the community to construct their own narratives. Some whispered of a swift and merciless illness, a plague that had swept through the isolated convent, claiming every soul within its walls. Others spoke of a sudden, fervent divine calling, leading the entire order to embark on an exodus to some distant, unknown land, far from the familiar Ohio landscape. Yet, the pragmatic and deeply superstitious villagers of Coldwater Creek clung to more unsettling theories. A profound curse laid upon the sacred ground, a malevolent haunting, or perhaps something far more sinister that the Church, in its wisdom or fear, had chosen to shroud in an impenetrable veil of silence. The convent remained, therefore, not merely an abandoned building, but a silent sentinel, a stark monument to unspoken prayers and unanswered questions that festered in the collective memory of the town. It was against this rich tapestry of historical mystery and deeply ingrained local folklore that the first bell chime was heard. Elias Thorne, a solitary trapper whose weathered cabin was nestled deep within the whispering woods bordering the convent's overgrown property, was the first to attest to the inexplicable sound. He swore, with the unwavering conviction of a man who spent his days attuned to the subtle symphony of nature, that he heard a single, clear peal, ringing out across the twilight. It was distinct, he insisted, from any known church bell in the distant towns, possessing a peculiar resonance that set it apart. His initial report was met with the expected skepticism, summarily dismissed by the villagers as the musings of a man too long isolated, perhaps prone to the occasional eccentricity born of solitude. However, Elias Thorne was not a man given to flights of fancy. His word in Coldwater Creek was considered as solid as the ancient oaks that dotted the landscape, known for his unnervingly keen senses and unyielding honesty. The following night, as dusk bled into darkness, the bell rang again. And then, the night after that, the same melancholic toll echoed through the desolate valley. It was never a joyous, vibrant peal for worship, but a singular, solemn chime, resonant and profoundly unsettling. It was a sound that seemed to carry the immeasurable weight of the convent's forgotten past, stirring ancient fears and deeply rooted superstitions within the hearts of all who heard it, drawing them inexorably into a mystery they could not comprehend. Word of the phantom bell, once a mere whisper, now spread like a wild, untamed fire through the small, closely knit community of Coldwater Creek. What Elias Thorne had initially reported as an isolated, perhaps anomalous, occurrence quickly solidified into a chilling nightly ritual, an unavoidable rhythm imposed upon their lives. Each evening, without fail, as the setting sun painted the sky in bruised purples and melancholic grays. A single, deep, resonant toll would emanate from the desolate stone edifice of the Old Mercy Convent. It was always precisely one chime, unwavering and clear, followed by a profound, echoing silence that felt heavier, more oppressive than the sound itself. It was a silence that seemed to swallow all other sounds, leaving only the thudding of anxious hearts in its wake. The villagers, a pragmatic and resilient folk accustomed to the predictable rhythms of nature and the steady, comforting cycles of farm life, found this nightly intrusion deeply unsettling. Their lives were governed by the sun's arc and the changing seasons, not by a spectral bell. Doors that had once remained hospitably ajar in the twilight hours, inviting neighborly visits and the scent of wood smoke, were now firmly bolted with an almost desperate urgency. Children, usually rambunctious and full of boisterous laughter until the moon was high in the sky, were now ushered inside well before sundown, their joyful shouts replaced by hushed whispers about the ghost bell, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and morbid fascination. Reverend Josiah Albright, the town's elderly and perpetually pragmatic spiritual leader, initially made concerted efforts to dismiss the phenomenon, attributing it to logical, if somewhat strained, explanations. He spoke with a practiced calm of peculiar atmospheric conditions, of sound carrying in unusual ways across the cold Ibiawi, still air. He even went so far as to suggest that perhaps a particularly strong gust of wind had dislodged a long-dormant mechanism within the ancient bell tower, a one-time occurrence that was now being overblown by fear. Yet, even his voice lacked its usual unwavering conviction, and his eyes, typically firm and resolute, darted almost imperceptibly towards the silhouette of the convent hill, with a flicker of undeniable unease, betraying his own creeping doubt. Despite the prevailing apprehension, several brave, or perhaps foolhardy, young men from the village, fueled by a potent mixture of youthful bravado and a burgeoning sense of civic duty, attempted to investigate. Armed with flickering lanterns and a shared sense of trepidation, they ventured towards the convent immediately after the nightly bell had rung. Their reports were consistently anticlimactic and profoundly unsatisfying. They found absolutely nothing out of the ordinary. The massive oaken front doors remained securely barred from within, seemingly undisturbed for decades. The windows, though grimy with age, were unbroken, and the profound silence inside the convent was absolute, suffocating in its completeness. The bell tower, visible from a distance, appeared utterly undisturbed, its weathered timbers unyielding and steadfast against the elements. Yet, despite the lack of any tangible explanation, the bell continued its nightly lament. It slowly transformed into a morbid, chilling clock, marking the relentless passage of time not by the reliable arc of the sun, but by the mysterious and deeply unnerving summons from the empty convent. 37 nights passed in this agonizing manner, each precise chime deepening the collective dread, weaving itself inextricably into the very fabric of Coldwater Creek's existence. The quiet, comforting hum of familiar village life was slowly, insidiously overtaken by a pervasive undercurrent of palpable, almost suffocating, fear that clung to every shadow and whispered in every breeze. It was on the 18th night of the bell's relentless, unwavering tolling that a new and profoundly significant element entered the rapidly unfolding mystery. Young Martha Higgins, a girl of 12 whose spirit was as curious as her eyes were bright, lived on a family farm that bordered the forgotten, overgrown grounds of the convent, while engaged in the mundane task of gathering firewood near the crumbling, ivy-choked wall that separated their property from the convent's desolate expanse. Her foot snagged on a loose, moss-covered stone. She stumbled, and as she instinctively threw out her hand to brace herself, her fingers brushed against something cold and surprisingly metallic, hidden beneath a tangle of thorny, ancient bushes that had seemingly protected it for decades. It was a small, intricately tarnished tin box, remarkably preserved and seemingly untouched by the relentless ravages of time or the harsh Ohio elements. Its surface was encrusted with a thin layer of earth and aged grime, hinting at its long burial. With trembling fingers, Martha managed to pry open the rusted clasp. Inside, Nestled amongst a scattering of dried, brittle leaves and a fine, almost ghostly layer of dust, lay a single, leather-bound journal. Its pages, brittle and yellowed with the passage of decades, were filled with an elegant, almost delicate script, faded by time but still remarkably legible. Martha, though young, possessed an innate sensitivity and an astute perception for the extraordinary. She knew, with a child's unerring instinct for profound discovery, that she had stumbled upon something of immense and immediate importance, something that transcended the simple act of gathering firewood. Her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, a tumultuous mix of exhilaration and a burgeoning sense of trepidation, Martha rushed back to her family's sturdy farmhouse. She burst through the door, breathless, and presented her remarkable find to her father, Thomas Higgins. Thomas was a man of quiet wisdom, known for his thoughtful demeanor and a deep, almost reverential respect for the fragile threads of history that bound their community. He took the dusty journal from his daughter's outstretched hands, his brow furrowed in concentration. After a moment of stunned, disbelieving silence, his fingers, surprisingly delicate for a man of the land, carefully opened the worn leather cover. The very first page bore a simple, yet profoundly resonant inscription, dated March 12, 1841. The Journal of Sister Agnes, Novice of the Order of St. Agnes. The immediate discovery of the journal sent a ripple of electrified anticipation throughout the village, cutting through the prevailing fear like a sharp, sudden blade. Could this fragile, forgotten relic be the long-sought key to understanding the convent's abrupt and inexplicable abandonment? Could it, perhaps, finally shed a much-needed light on the genesis and purpose of the phantom bell that had held them captive for so many nights? Reverend Albright, accompanied by Thomas Higgins and a small, trusted group of village elders, gathered in the Reverend's study. They meticulously and painstakingly began the delicate process of transcribing the fragile entries, their voices hushed with reverence, their faces etched with a profound mixture of desperate hope and chilling foreboding. Each translated word felt like a step deeper into a forgotten nightmare. The journal, as its pages were slowly and carefully revealed, began to weave a meticulously kept, yet increasingly desperate, record of the convent's final, agonizing days. It was a narrative far removed from the convenient and comforting tales of widespread illness or a sudden, divinely inspired calling that the community had fashioned over the years. Sister Agnes, through her elegant, fading script, detailed a slow, insidious, creeping dread that had infiltrated the very lives of the sisters, not from external forces, but from within the very sacred walls of their sanctuary. Her entries spoke not of physical ailment, but of an unshakable sense of being constantly watched by unseen eyes, of inexplicable, bone-chilling drafts in sealed rooms, and of faint, melancholic humming sounds, almost like a mournful lullaby, heard only in the dead of the long, silent nights. As the diligent elders of Coldwater Creek continued their painstaking and emotionally taxing translation of Sister Agnes's fragile journal, a deeply disturbing and profoundly chilling narrative began to emerge, one far more unsettling than any of the local legends or whispered superstitions. The entries, increasingly frantic and disjointed in tone, meticulously described a peculiar and insidious shift within the convent's once serene atmosphere. It was not a sudden, cataclysmic event, a singular moment of horror, but rather a gradual, almost imperceptible descent into an unnerving, suffocating silence, a slow unraveling of the very fabric of their consecrated lives. The words on the yellowed pages painted a picture of a spiritual decay, a creeping malevolence that took root and slowly blossomed into pure dread. Sister Agnes, with her precise and eloquent hand, detailed how the communal prayers, once vibrant and filled with an unwavering conviction, became hesitant, punctuated by uneasy, furtive glances amongst the sisters and quick, almost desperate crossings of oneself. The once melodic chants grew strained, riddled with discord. The sisters themselves, once a picture of unwavering serenity and shared spiritual purpose, grew increasingly withdrawn and palpably fearful. Their once open conversations were reduced to hushed, anxious whispers, their gazes frequently fixed on unseen points in the empty, echoing corridors, as if constantly searching for a spectral presence that lurked just beyond the periphery of their vision. The very act of devotion became a fearful supplication rather than a joyful communion. She wrote extensively of the chill that settled in the chapel, a pervasive and profound coldness that seemed to defy the roaring fire in the massive hearth, a chill that seeped into their very bones and made their spirits ache with an icy dread. This was not merely the dampness inherent to an old stone building, Sister Agnes stressed. It was a deep, soul-deep cold that seemed to originate from within the very fabric of the convent itself. And with this unnatural cold came a peculiar and unnerving absence of sound, the chirping of crickets outside the thick walls, the gentle rustling of leaves in the convent gardens. Even the familiar creaking and groaning of the old timber framework itself seemed to diminish, leaving behind an unnatural, profound, and utterly terrifying stillness that pressed in on them. Most disturbing, however, were her recurring accounts of Mother Cecilia, the Mother Superior, once a towering beacon of spiritual strength, unwavering faith, and absolute moral certainty, became increasingly consumed by a private, agonizing torment. Sister Agnes wrote of Mother Cecilia, spending countless, solitary hours alone in the convent's tall, imposing bell tower, long after Vespers had concluded and the convent had settled into its nightly slumber. Her gaunt silhouette was often visible against the cold, indifferent moonlight, a solitary, tormented figure. Her reasons for being there remained a profound mystery, even to her closest and most devoted sisters, adding another layer of unsettling ambiguity to the unfolding horror. The journal hinted darkly at a secret burden, a growing despair that slowly but inexorably isolated the Mother Superior from her devoted flock, drawing her into a solitary, internal struggle. The entries also frequently mentioned a recurring, faint melody, a haunting, almost mournful lullaby of sorts that seemed to drift inexplicably from the convent's long-abandoned nursery, a room that had not been used for its intended purpose in decades. Sister Agnes, a woman known for her rational mind and deeply grounded nature, struggled desperately to reconcile these baffling and inexplicable occurrences with her unwavering faith. Her journal entries reflected a growing internal conflict, a profound struggle between her unwavering devotion to God and the palpable, suffocating fear that slowly but inexorably enveloped her and her beloved sisters. The final entry, dated March 20th, 1841, was brief and almost illegible, scrawled with a shaking, desperate hand. "The cold has taken root. She rings for us. There is no escape, only silence." The very next day, the convent was discovered deserted, the sisters gone, leaving behind only the profound and enduring mystery that had haunted Coldwater Creek for 20 long, silent years. With the chilling revelations unearthed from the pages of Sister Agnes's journal, the nightly bell acquired a terrifying, profoundly new meaning for the people of Coldwater Creek. It was no longer merely a phantom sound, a curious anomaly in the stillness of the night. It was now understood as a lingering echo from a chilling, unspeakable past, a haunting lament from the lost sisters themselves, the terrifying realization that the bell had rung on the very day of the convent's abrupt and mysterious abandonment, as chillingly hinted at in the journal's final, desperate entry, sent a fresh, visceral wave of dread coursing through the already frightened community. The sound was no longer just an external phenomenon, it had become an internal terror. The journal, in all its detailed horror, made no mention of why the bell would ring. There was no indication of any sister being specifically tasked with this duty at such an ungodly, late hour, nor did it serve any traditional religious purpose in the way Sister Agnes meticulously described the daily rhythms of convent life. The ringing seemed to be an unsolicited act, an imposition, a sound that forced itself upon the desolate structure, defying logic and explanation. The implication, stark and terrifying, was clear. If a sister, a living, breathing human, wasn't actively ringing it, then something else was. The terrifying thought sent shivers down the spine of every resident. Reverend Albright, a man whose steadfast faith had always been the sturdy, unyielding anchor in his life and for his community, found himself deeply and profoundly troubled. He reread Sister Agnes's final, almost illegible entry repeatedly, his lips moving silently, the chilling phrase, "She rings for us," echoing ceaselessly in the chambers of his mind. Who, or what, was she? Was it a person, a lingering, spectral presence, or perhaps an abstract personification of the very despair and unnamed horror that had utterly consumed the convent? The answers remained maddeningly elusive, stubbornly cloaked in the mists of history, and the chilling implications gleaned from the fragmented truths within the journal. The absence of a concrete answer amplified the terror. A palpable, almost suffocating sense of an unseen, malevolent presence settled over the entire village. People began to speak in hushed, furtive tones of lingering spirits, of restless souls trapped between the earthly realm and the unknown beyond. The children, already deeply frightened by the relentless nightly bell, now envisioned spectral figures haunting the deserted convent, their vivid imaginations fueled by the fragmented, horrifying stories they overheard from their increasingly anxious parents. The convent, once just an abandoned building, transformed into a sinister, watchful entity, its silence more terrifying than any sound. The fear, once a distant tremor in the periphery of their lives, had now taken deep, unshakable root in the very heart of Coldwater Creek. The bell was no longer merely a curious phenomenon or a local oddity. It had transmuted into a terrifying summons, a nightly, inescapable reminder of something inexplicable and profoundly terrifying that had unfolded within the convent's silent stone walls. The villagers found themselves listening intently each night, not just for the familiar, singular toll of the bell, but for any other sound that might follow, any other sign, any other confirmation of an unseen presence from the desolate structure on the hill. The very act of waiting became a form of torture. The air in Coldwater Creek became thick with an unspoken, pervasive tension. Every creak of a floorboard in their own homes, every mournful moan of the wind as it whistled through the eaves, every distant rustle of leaves seemed amplified, imbued with a sinister, foreboding meaning. The familiar comfort of their homes became a fragile shield against an unseen threat. Coldwater Creek, once a picture of rural tranquility and predictable rhythms, had slowly but inexorably transformed into a village gripped by an unseen hand, held captive by the rhythmic, unnerving toll of the bell from the empty convent, awaiting its next unknown horror. As the 37th night, the final, fated night in this chilling saga, approached, a heavy, almost oppressive silence fell over Coldwater Creek. It was a silence so profound it seemed to absorb all other sounds, broken only by the mournful hoot of a distant owl or the nervous, almost whimpering bark of a dog somewhere far off in the darkness. The entire community braced itself, a collective breath held in agonizing anticipation. The journal had revealed a harrowing, incomplete truth, a fragment of a nightmare, and the bell, for 36 consecutive nights, had been its chilling, relentless echo. Tonight, they knew with a profound, soul-deep certainty, would be different. Tonight, something would break, or be broken. A soft, almost ethereal snowfall had begun that afternoon, dusting the entire landscape in a pristine, ghostly white. The delicate flakes muffled the already subdued sounds of the village, creating an eerie quiet that only amplified the prevailing tension. The cold was biting, a relentless chill that penetrated through layers of homespun wool and thick blankets, seeping into bones and souls. Windows that had once been open to the fresh air were now shuttered tight, secured against an unseen intrusion. Families huddled closer to their hearths, seeking comfort in the warmth and flickering light, their conversations reduced to hushed, anxious whispers. Their eyes frequently darted towards the frosted panes, as if expecting to see something monstrous materialize beyond the glass, a spectral visitor from the convent. Elias Thorne, from his isolated cabin deep within the snow-laden woods, sat hunched by his crackling fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on his weathered face. His usually steady, calloused hands were trembling almost imperceptibly as he poured himself another cup of strong, black tea. seeking warmth and a fleeting moment of calm. He had heard every single chime of the bell, each one seeming to resonate within his very bones, a chilling echo in his solitude. He clutched a small, worn wooden cross, its smooth surface cold against his palm, his gaze fixed on the convent's dark, ominous silhouette against the backdrop of the moonlit snow. He felt, with an eerie, prescient certainty, that tonight would be profoundly different, that the strange ritual was nearing its terrible climax. In the village, Reverend Albright knelt in his sparsely furnished study. The fragile, yellowed pages of Sister Agnes's journal spread out meticulously before him on a worn wooden table. He prayed, not for a simple explanation, for he knew some mysteries defied human understanding, but for solace, for a fragile peace for the lost souls of the sisters, and for unwavering strength for his frightened flock. He knew in his heart that the answers, if they ever came, would likely not be found in the realm of the tangible or the rational, but in the deeper, more profound mysteries that lay beyond the very limits of human comprehension. He was praying for acceptance, for endurance. As the moon climbed higher in the inky sky, casting long, spectral shadows across the pristine, snow-covered fields, the air grew taut with an unbearable expectation. The minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity, each tick of the grandfather clock feeling like a hammer blow against the collective heart of the village. The customary time for the bell to toll came and went. A collective, almost imperceptible gasp was held throughout the village, a shared moment of suspended animation. Was it over? Had the haunting finally ceased? Had the long, chilling nightmare finally come to an end? Then, just as a faint, tentative sense of relief began to unfurl, like a fragile bloom in the bitter cold, a sound ripped through the profound stillness. It wasn't the single, clear, mournful toll they had grown accustomed to, the precise, solitary note that marked their evenings. This was profoundly different. This was a series of rapid, frantic chimes, a cacophony of desperate, uncontrolled rings, as if someone or something was pulling the bell rope with a frenzied, uncontrolled abandon, fueled by an unseen terror. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated terror, a desperate, final, agonizing plea echoing across the frozen, snow-laden landscape, a piercing cry from the abyss. The frantic, desperate pealing from the Old Mercy Convent, a cacophony of uncontrolled metal against metal, lasted for what felt like an eternity, though in reality, it was perhaps no more than a minute of sheer, unadulterated terror. It was a chaotic, discordant clamor, utterly unlike any bell chime heard before in the quiet valley, a wild, frantic thrashing that conveyed a profound and overwhelming sense of struggle, anguish, and ultimate despair. It was a sound that tore at the very fabric of the night, raw and terrifying. Then, as suddenly and inexplicably as it had begun, it ceased. An absolute, bone-chilling silence descended upon Coldwater Creek, a profound stillness that was deeper and more suffocating than any silence that had come before. A silence that seemed to vibrate with residual fear. The villagers, who had huddled in their homes, paralyzed by the sudden, terrifying outburst, slowly dared to breathe again, their lungs aching with the effort. The air in their homes seemed to grow heavy, thick with the unspoken, terrifying question that hung in the oppressive stillness. What, precisely, had just happened? What final, agonizing act had taken place within the desolate, silent walls of the convent? The desperate, horrifying ringing left an indelible mark, a permanent scar etched into the collective memory of the town, a sound that would echo in their minds long after it had faded from the air. No one, not a single soul, dared to venture towards the convent that night. The very thought was anathema, a descent into madness. The snow continued to fall softly, silently, blanketing the land in a pristine, almost innocent white, as if trying to erase the terrifying memory of the frantic, desperate sound that had just emanated from the hill. But the memory persisted, vivid and chilling, burning itself into the minds of every man, woman, and child who had heard it. A torment that could not be purged by the falling snow. Sleep offered no escape. Only restless, fitful dreams haunted by the spectral sound of a bell ringing in raw, unadulterated terror. The next morning, the sun rose hesitantly, casting a pale, weak light over the snow-covered landscape, as if reluctant to illuminate the horrors of the previous night. A small contingent of men, their faces grim and resolute, led by the steadfast Thomas Higgins and the deeply troubled Reverend Albright, approached the convent with a palpable mixture of profound dread and grim determination. They found no physical evidence of any struggle, no broken ropes, no footprints in the fresh, unmarked snow leading to or from the bell tower. The massive oak doors remained sealed, unyielding, as if defying any attempt to penetrate the secrets within. The convent stood as an unyielding, impenetrable fortress of silence. The silence that now emanated from the convent was absolute, suffocating, broken only by the mournful wind whistling through the crevices of the old stone and the occasional creak of the ancient timbers. The bell tower, visible against the stark gray sky, appeared exactly as it had for the past 20 years. Silent, still, and impossibly, eerily empty. The bell itself, a dark, motionless silhouette against the winter light, gave no hint, no physical evidence of the frantic, terrifying symphony it had performed just hours earlier. It remained a silent, metallic sentinel, offering no answers, only continued enigma. The inexplicable and abrupt cessation of the bell, following such a terrifying and violent final outburst, left a gaping, unfillable void in the community's understanding. It was as if the very air itself held its breath, forever awaiting an explanation that would never, could never, come. The quiet hum of Coldwater Creek had been irrevocably altered, fundamentally changed. It was now imbued with a permanent undercurrent of unresolved mystery, a pervasive sense of unease that lingered like a cold mist, an unwritten chapter of a terrifying story that continued to unfold in the silence. The bell from the Old Mercy Convent never rang again. The profound silence that followed the terrifying 37th night settled over Coldwater Creek like an inescapable shroud, a deep and unsettling stillness that was, in its own way, far more unsettling than the nightly tolls had ever been. The abrupt absence of the sound left a vacuum, a lingering, pervasive chill that permeated every aspect of village life, a constant reminder of the inexplicable event. It was a silence that spoke volumes, echoing with unspoken questions and unresolved fears. The convent remained, a brooding, enigmatic presence on the hill, its weather-beaten stone walls now a silent, imposing monument to an unresolved mystery. The villagers, though no longer plagued by the nightly, chilling bell, could not shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed, that an invisible, impenetrable veil had been drawn over their once simple community. The profound silence emanating from the convent was not peaceful or comforting. It was heavy, laden with unspoken secrets and the chilling echoes of a past that stubbornly refused to fully recede into the annals of history. It was a silence that carried the weight of a scream. Children born in Coldwater Creek in the years that followed grew up hearing the story of the bell. It became an ingrained part of their local folklore, a cautionary tale whispered around flickering fireplaces on long, cold winter nights. It served as a stark, chilling reminder of the inexplicable forces that sometimes touched their quiet world, forces that defied logic and reason. The Old Mercy Convent, once merely an abandoned building, transformed into a place of profound symbolic weight, a testament to the enduring presence of the unknown, a silent testament to a tragedy that defied comprehension. Reverend Albright, in his twilight years, often spoke of the convent, not as a place of malevolent evil, but as a place of profound, unbearable sadness, a stark testament to what happens when despair, grief, or perhaps something darker, takes root in the human heart and spirit. He held a deep-seated belief that the bell, in its relentless nightly toll, was a cry for help, a desperate, final signal from souls trapped in a cycle of suffering, forever bound to their earthly torment. He posited that its final, frantic, terrifying outburst was a lasty, desperate attempt to communicate, to be heard, before finally succumbing to a profound, inescapable silence that swallowed all sound and all hope. The true fate of the Sisters of St. Agnes, and the precise nature of the chill or malevolent force that had claimed them, remained forever shrouded in the mists of time, an unsolvable riddle. Sister Agnes's journal offered tantalizing glimpses, fragmented pieces of a terrifying truth, but never a full, coherent explanation. The bell had rung for 37 nights, a mournful lament, a desperate plea, a terrifying warning, and then, in the bleak winter of 1861, Ohio, it stopped. The mystery of the old Mercy Convent became a permanent fixture in the folklore of Coldwater Creek, a haunting echo in the quiet, shadowed corners of the heart, a stark, unsettling reminder that some questions are never meant to be answered, their true power lying precisely in their enduring, chilling ambiguity.
If you like this type of stories, leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos.